Hey, thank you so much for joining us again for another episode of Just Shilling. I want to just say hello to some folks that are piling in so far. Richard, Brittany, Zach, wonderful. Thank you all. I know there are more people coming in, but LinkedIn never loves to show me all of the faces. But we do have a special treat for you all today and our incredible guest. And before we get into that, I wanted to just lay out some ground rules. This is a safe space, so there are no stupid questions. Feel free to join the conversation for sure. And if it's anything that's probably going to be a little bit too spicy or controversial for like a family dinner, we want to avoid that here. And last but not least, nothing that we discuss today is financial advice, and the opinions that we share are of our own and do not necessarily represent our respective companies. So, without further ado, I'm going to welcome the wonderful Annelise. How are you doing, Annelise?
Thank you so much for having me, Trevor and Emily and Amanda. I really appreciate it. I'm very excited to be here. This is my first LinkedIn Live, so
Whoa, first
sharing it with you.
time. Look at
Yes.
that. Another achievement. Look at that. Love it. We have Shannon, we have Chris here as well too. Chris, you're probably familiar with meeting him at the most recent BBA event. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, let's give the audience a 30-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you're currently up to today.
Oh my goodness. I am Chief Business Officer of Kadena, which is a layer one proof of work blockchain that was built the best of both worlds between Ethereum and Bitcoin, founded by two JP Morgan gentlemen. I'm also the recent author of From Hoodies to Suits, which is From Hoodies to Suits, Innovating Digital Assets for Traditional Finance. I'm really focused on how do we upgrade finance and how do we educate? The book is really kind of an educational tool, so more people will understand why things are changing and why we're doing what we're doing.
Fantastic, fantastic. So let's go back in time to the genesis when you were working in TradFi. So bring the audience up to speed a little bit about your experiences there and what led you to even wanting to be in this industry.
Sure. So I'm a bit different in the sense that I grew up. There's four kids in my family. We were all born in different countries, so we traveled a lot. I grew up in the Marshall Islands. After college, I went and I worked in Ukraine and in London, and it was just really interesting. I think travel is such an education for so many different things, but I think it opens your mind to more and to learning. I worked in commercial real estate when I was in Europe, and then I did commercial mortgage-backed securities when I came to the US after business school. And that was super interesting because it was its own innovative sense of financing. It decreased the cost of financing and it allowed more borrowing because it shifted the risk from the bank's balance sheet to different bondholders who could buy at the level of risk they were interested in, and they got paid commensurately for that. So I've always loved the idea of innovation and kind of starting up businesses. I left and I was at Moody's for 12 years. Super interesting through the financial crisis, all different sorts of structures within structured finance and commercial mortgage-backed securities. And then I was asked to join the board of a blockchain and cryptocurrency regulatory task force focused on ICOs. And I was not very familiar with ICOs. I had done a lot of corporate governance and board work, and that kind of drove me into the industry. So doing all my research, I recognized how amazing this technology was for finance and how I thought other people were working on it, and it wasn't my problem to solve. But then the people that were working on it really were the hoodie side. So it was really entrepreneurs and tech people who recognized what this could do, but didn't have the experience of regulation or didn't have the experience of traditional finance and structuring. So that suits side to make sure that the transactions were actually regulatory compliant and that they weren't false starts. And so I met a partner and who had a broker dealer. We kind of launched into the space. So that is how I got in the space, which was in 2018, which was not that long ago, but very long ago at the same time.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Years in this space, it's kind of equivalent to dog years. It feels a lot longer than they actually are, but that's another beauty of the space. And, kind of being here now, what are some stark differences that are very kind of evident to you from your transition in, TradFi to working in this industry?
This industry is fantastic in the sense that it's very inquisitive and we're looking for new ways to do things as opposed to accepting the status quo. I think a lot in traditional finance think finance isn't broken. And while I'll say finance isn't broken, but it can be upgraded, people are afraid of change. And so one of the huge benefits, which I also think comes with these next generations, is looking at things and how can we make it better, as opposed to it's fine, it's not broken, we don't need to fix it. So I feel like that's fantastic in this industry. And it challenges your mind, it challenges how you approach things, and it just kind of keeps you sharp. So I feel like that's a big difference.
Yeah. Now, many institutions, and we'll get into this a little bit more during our conversation, but this is a theme that I think would resonate with you. And many institutions, I feel like, simply just don't understand how blockchain works and how it could really improve their existing operations. So, what is the importance of continuous education for you, and how does that matter to you?
The reason, well, I learned all about my education for blockchain was really on YouTube. This is back in 17 and 18. I was speaking to a bank after FTX failed, and they told me they had a cease and desist talking about anything crypto. And to me, that was a recognition that they weren't aware of the benefits of blockchain and that FTX was a bad actor situation. And so that's when I decided that I wanted to write a book. So people, and it was aimed at I say the average finance Bob, right? That wasn't as familiar with this technology, but knew finance, just so they would understand, what does it mean to me? Like, why should this be important to me? So I think education is huge. We were just talking before we started off about podcasts. I listen to so many podcasts and I love it because there's so much going on within the industry. It's difficult to it's difficult to be an expert in absolutely everything. And so education and listening and having conversations and even meetups and networking, like, it's so important to actually continue talking with other people. Otherwise, you're kind of stuck on your own and it's hard to educate yourself in a vacuum.
Definitely, for sure. Now, you've been at the forefront of digital assets for years. What excites you most about where the space is headed?
Oh, there's so many places it can go. So when I got into the space originally, I had done fixed income and debt. So my goal was, if you think about bonds or loans, they're really just one big Excel spreadsheet and how it all plays out. And even the legal documents are generally an Excel spreadsheet. And that could all be programmable. Having been in the industry of fixed income and bonds and loans, there's so many mistakes that are made because people open up an Excel spreadsheet and they'll input data, or they'll copy an Excel spreadsheet from the last deal and they'll input data. So for me, that was really thinking of, we could have programmable bonds and programmable money. And I feel like that takes a step further. People have a hard time, I think, visualizing what that means, but it's just so much more efficient. There's so many issues in, tracking and tracing bonds as well, or, the idea of who owns what. I just think there's so many benefits. So that was for me, that was what made me so interested.
And one of the other things as well too is that you mentioned this before, that digital assets can really increase transparency and access. So how do you think they'll actually transform the financial industry in ways that people probably haven't considered yet?
I do think that will be the case. So, I look at the Jetsons moment, right? The Jetsons, from like 60 years ago, and it's in another, like, what is it? 24, I think. And almost all of the things there have come to fruition, right? There are robots that help clean the house. There's 3D printing. There's all the Zooms that we do. So I feel like also that what we can do with digital assets, I think our investment portfolios will change as well. I think if we look at the next generations, and we're also thinking of finance kind of 2, 5, 10, 20 years out, right?
Yeah.
So I think every time we change, we need to change kind of where are we going and where are we headed, and why. So I think the wealth dynamic is changing drastically. Maybe not drastically, but the wealth dynamic is changing. And the money's really going into the hands from the baby boomers now, which have half of the world's wealth. It's going to millennial and Gen Z.
Yeah.
And millennial and Gen Z look at the world very differently than, say, even Gen X does. The expectation of everything being digital and being at your fingers, I think, is huge. And I think that can be highlighted in different ways of of things that have happened, even from personal investing. With if you look at kind of what happened with GameStop, so
Mm,
GameStop was really social media. It was a group of people getting together, and I think something like that will happen again. If you look at the number of people that are Robinhood clients, they're, I think, what is it? Under 35 is like 85 or 85%. I think I
yeah.
need to check the numbers, but it's about that. And it's just so interesting that people are not investing like their parents did. And if you look at the amount of money that will be in their hands, they're going to be in control of a lot outside of just running the companies and making the decisions. And the decisions that's just from an investing, right? From, if you think about private assets, which people don't have access to now, I really think they will. BlackRock did a study of the family offices. And when I studied finance, they talked about the balanced portfolio of being 60-40 stocks and bonds.
Yeah.
And so now the BlackRock study shows family offices is 60-40 traditional and alternative. So it's a very different mentality, because alternatives we haven't, as retail investors, haven't really been able to invest in. So some people be able to invest in real estate if they know the right people that are inviting them in, right? So this kind of will open up the playing field for sure for that. I do think programmable money and cross-border payments, I think that is going to kind of lay the foundation for how we move forward as well. When you're thinking about that, I feel like people already see. So I'm not sure that's how we're going to kind of structure how blockchain is going to make that much of a difference, because I think people will have much more efficient experiences, not even realizing it's blockchain underneath, and they won't need to talk about blockchain anymore,
Yeah.
right? So even with digital dollars or programmable money, you're just going to have, if the interface is similar to your Web 2 interface, you won't even know why it's more efficient.
Yeah, hopefully we're heading in that direction. I think there have been a lot of advancements being made, kind of on the front end UI UX side with a lot of these apps, and it's definitely heading in the right direction. The next question is based on, you're not really a stranger to disruption. You've been doing this for a long time. How do you maintain that, I would say, delicate balance between, this disruptive innovation of blockchain and then the careful precision of traditional finance?
So I try not to look at it as disruption. I look at it as an upgrade. And so how do we make it, how do we make the world more efficient and better? And so I think a lot, part of it is how do we stay vested, only because there's been a lot of peaks and troughs and starts and stops.
Yeah.
But recognizing I work with wonderful people, and I think that, and inspiring people. And there are so many inspiring people in this industry that I have known for years and met along the way. And so I feel like that really keeps you going. But the branch between kind of TradFi and innovation, I think one of the holdups is, I talked about before, education, regulation, interoperability, kind of education I could do something about. Regulation, I feel like is very gray.
Yeah.
I feel like that's difficult in the United States because you can't play in the gray for institutions when I'm thinking about TradFi and innovation. But there are things that we can create. At Arca Labs, we had a tokenized treasury fund even before Franklin Templeton did. So there are ways to work with the regulators. So the regulators want to learn as well. They want to understand it. Their goal is really to be reactive, not proactive. Their goal is to protect investors. So when you approach them kind of from an educational perspective and wanting to work within the boundaries, I think that's the best way to move this industry forward.
Wonderful. I do see that someone's raising their hand. So for anyone that does have a question, I should have clarified this a little bit earlier. Just hold on. We're going to kind of get to the halfway mark here, and then we'll let you jump in and get to your question. So you kind of alluded to this, that you had many mentors and people that you looked up to and learned from in this space. And now I would consider that you're a mentor and a leader in the space as well. Now, you were mentioning that some of the rules are still being written. What's the most important lesson, that you can teach those that are potentially following in your footsteps?
Oh, I try to say communicate, right? I feel like there's a lot of misunderstandings with communication. I think one other thing is you have got to be proud of what you're doing, right? And you can work so hard developing a reputation over so long, and you can lose it really quickly
So
if
true.
you decide to associate yourself with the bad ICO, for example, right? And and it's hard to come back from that, especially when when you want to work with regulators, when you want to work with institutions. So I feel like you have to, stick to your guns and remember who you are, which it's just, we're criticized so much more in this industry, I think, than many other industries. If you were a bond analyst, you wouldn't be thought of that way. I feel like people are always looking for things that we could look at as a potential conflict of interest for us. So I feel like, you've got to keep yourself clean.
Yes, absolutely. Now, let's just kind of get to your book as well. And when you were working on that, what was the most successful collaboration that helped you really kind of facilitate that bridging the cultural gap?
Um, Collaboration. So the book was all in my head from having worked for the last few years and recognizing kind of what I thought was happening. From a collaboration perspective, it's really talking to people in the industry to help form your opinions. Um, but then I will say, very collaborative when I sent drafts out to people that I thought would be my biggest critics.
Ah,
Uh, and I did that on purpose because you never know. It's just, it was just me writing it. And so I was really surprised that they came back very positive, and there was very little in comments. One had wished I talked more about something they were interested in, which would have been a total tangent that I talk about. But I mean, that was a huge collaboration, because it's a lot to ask someone to read your book when you don't, we're all busy. So
yeah,
I feel like that was, that has been that, and kind of the industry acceptance of the book and appreciation has been really amazing.
that's great. Now, you've been able to, in your career, meet so many amazing people, a lot of people that, are leaders in their own right. So, now that you've been able to kind of brush shoulders with so many people, what is something that keeps you humble and able to still kind of, be so open just to meet and share your knowledge with the little guys?
Oh, that's so kind of you to say. We're all in the same boat. There's so much to learn. There's so many, there's so many things I don't know. And I feel there's a lot of people, I love to surround myself with people who know more than me in whatever aspect that is. And so that's super important. So it's not really, I think me sharing with kind of the little guys, I do a lot of teaching. I do a lot with students. That's the only person I would think of as, someone that is not out in the working world yet. But otherwise, even if someone has less experience than me, they probably have more experience in something very specifically different than what I know. So I know a lot of traditional finance. I know how to structure bonds and funds and all different things like that, and generally how it all plugs into on chain. But I feel like I can learn something from everyone, even my mentees. I've learned a lot from, outside of just acronyms, because I get taught acronyms a lot.
I think we all do. And have you had any major setbacks in your career that ended up turning into being your greatest advantage? And how did that all come about?
Oh goodness. I mean, I was different because I didn't have, so when I went to Columbia Business School, I was different because I felt like everybody else came out of banking and was going to go back into banking. And I had worked in Europe, and I was a little bit, I just didn't have the same resume. But I also feel like you should use that to your advantage, because it makes you different. And
Yes.
at the time, I guess, you feel like the imposter syndrome. But we're all in the same boat. And I had done a lot of the modeling that they had done. So I feel like that was interesting, like getting a job and selling myself short to an extent, because just because I wasn't an investment banking analyst didn't mean that I couldn't be up for, whatever job that was. Obviously I've, moved around since then, but I think that is probably something that's been really problematic. I have moved around within my career. I feel like there's different chapters. Obviously, this is my blockchain, which is hopefully where I'm staying. But doing traditional finance, working in Europe and abroad, I feel all of that builds. I love a challenge, and I love that I continue learning, and I think that's what I'm always attracted to. So I feel like, yes, I've had my setbacks, but you have to figure out how do you get around it? What do you learn from, and how to use it to your advantage? So I agree.
Yeah, and persistence is key. I know that social responsibility is something that's important to you as well, and digital assets, they're often hailed as this key to financial inclusion in many ways. What's maybe one practical way they can genuinely change lives on a global scale?
So I lived in a country that had high inflation, and they had kept their money in the banks, and then they never got their money out of the banks because they didn't get it back.
Wow.
And so I feel like, this is, it's not my main focus, obviously, but recognizing that it digital money in whatever form or cryptocurrencies, whatever form it takes, whether you believe in it or not believe in it, it's a store of value for people that live in areas that don't have the financial security we have in the United States. And I think that's been big. I think it's really been big being able to transfer money as well in some of these economies. Most people have cell phones as well.
Yeah.
So the fact that it can be digital. I also think one thing that we haven't really talked about is digital identity. I'm a believer that digital identity will be solved as well. And that from a finance perspective is kind of KYC AML, but from a life perspective, there's a lot of people that don't have birth certificates or were born places that, nobody knows who you are. And I think that this digital identity will help them as well. Not
Yeah.
everybody has a bank account. There's a whole world outside of, my little circle in New York City.
And do you think that, building on your previous response, do you think that by most people in, where we are in America, do you think that that could be a potential reason why it's been slower to adopt this type of technology than other jurisdictions around the world? Because, we have other options, and it's just much easier for kind of a quality of life.
I think that is one. I think another is regulation and not being on offer as much because we have more regulatory hurdles than, say, some other areas that have been a little more open. So yes, I was just on a call with someone and we were focused on South America. And it was just really interesting how that area is so much more open. I feel like from a per capita perspective than the United States. Younger generations, the fact of the currency inflation too is probably something. Just being much more digital and more interested in tokenization than the U.S. I think the U.S. we have a very comfortable lifestyle, and not everybody likes change. A lot of it goes back to it's like I don't want to have to learn something new.
Yeah.
But as the population skews younger, I think that's going to be very different.
Now, let's kind of talk about resiliency and adaptability. In an industry as unpredictable as this, how do you build resilience, not just for yourself, but for others?
Oh, I have a very positive mental state. I'm
How,
definitely
how do you achieve that? How do you achieve that?
definitely an optimist. I try to surround myself with people that challenge me. I, I enjoy what I do. I love my job. I try to do yoga. This is I try to exercise. My
Mhm.
latest exercise is yoga. It switches. So I do try to do that a few times a week because I think it's really important to get outside. We work remotely. And so it's super important to be in person and be around people as well. I think it is very efficient to work remotely because you don't have to travel to and from. But it's also important to mix that with kind of networking and being around people because I do enjoy time by myself, but I also enjoy spending time with others and learning from others. And so I feel like, finding your balances. And I've been around for a while. What we are doing is not, no one's, if something's a day late, no one's going to die. And so like recognizing that we have timelines and timelines are important, but they're not as important as if you're doing a surgery or something. And so keeping all of this in perspective, I think is really helpful as well. But you'd
And
have,
no,
as
I agree. Because you are incredible in terms of the amounts of events that you're doing. I mean, I was looking at your LinkedIn feed, and I know that you're traveling somewhere else and doing another speaking engagement, and it seems like it never stops. So, what's your advice for someone that maybe is wanting to learn how to better network and to be effective when they go to these events or networking events and they're out and about meeting people? How can they be more impactful?
Sure. So I've been around for a while too, but I do love that people are kind enough to invite me places. I think that first, you want to be genuine, right? I enjoy meeting other people and learning from them. So it's not that I meet people because I want something from them,
Hmm.
which is kind of a different mentality. I never
Yes.
look at anything as, like a tit for tat, or I just really genuinely, like Trevor, we met in Boston, and it's just so wonderful to meet you in person and just spend time together and kind of absorb all the way you think. And I genuinely enjoy that. So sometimes people have problems with small talk. So small talk, I always used to read. This is kind of years ago. There was on the subway, there was like AM New York, I think it was called, and it had all these news bits, but none of them were like, we don't have to talk about interest rates, for example. Like they were little tidbits that were always interesting, or you could bring up just finding ways to connect with other people. And sometimes that's a bit about news. I try to stay away from, initially I stay away from kids. We get there, but I grew up in TradFi, and in TradFi, like I was a woman and I wasn't supposed to have kids or talk about them. So I
Yeah.
feel like that's a little different, but I feel like that at some point comes along, but not everybody has kids. But I do find try to find different ways to connect with people, just kind of genuinely learn, but just show up, right? The hardest thing is showing up. So, and I've also found I got my first public board from a dinner that I did not want to go to like 10 years ago. So it's just making yourself go. And great opportunities present themselves. So I've been very lucky in that sense.
It's amazing. It's sometimes like when you have that feeling of this, like you're like, oh, I don't want to do it, or you're reluctant, and that turns out to be that really transformational moment in a lot of people's lives. Now, you just touched on this a little bit, and I wanted to dive into it a little bit more, but you've been a trailblazer, in typically a male-dominated industry, and I know that there's a lot of potential and room to grow in this industry as well, but what's been your most empowering moment as a woman that's a leader?
Wow. My most empowering moment. Let me think about that as I share some things with you.
Okay, go for it.
So when I was invited on that first board, I did not know, I wasn't a CEO. I hadn't been a CEO of a public company. And so I got together my own board of directors, and my own like mentors. And I called them my own board of directors, whether they knew it or not. And I felt like that was super empowering. One, so maybe this is it. One, that that I knew them, but they all sat down with me, and like individually, I would have coffee with them, something to fit in their schedule, and really just their advice and everything that they passed down to me. And I appreciate every single one of them so much that they all gave me time. They all referred me to talk to other people, and they all just taught me some basic things. So I felt like that was really empowering. And that was kind of early on in the fact that I was offered that opportunity. I'm thinking about it because it was directly there. But I guess there's steps along the way. You have to celebrate the small wins as well, because otherwise we're always striving to see, where are we trying to get to. So I feel like there's a lot of steps along the way, because you're never going to be at the end of you're never going to get there wherever there is, because there's always going to be something further along or someone that has more. But pulling that board of directors was super empowering for me.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we're at about that halfway mark. I told you this is going to go by really fast. So if folks are in the audience and you would like to ask a question, please do raise your hand. We're going to do our best to get you up there. I will just ask that you keep the question on topic to kind of what we've been having a conversation about here. So I did see a few folks there in the audience that had their hands raised, but maybe they stepped away. We'll give some more time for folks to come up. But in the meantime, one of the
Trev, could
yeah,
I ask a question?
yeah, absolutely, go for it.
Hey, Annelise. So nice to meet you. I'm on the Crypto Recruiters team. I have loved hearing about you and your background and experiences. I'd love to ask what made you a good decision maker.
Oh, goodness. At some point you have to be decisive, I think, because there's so many decisions to make in a day, and to be comfortable in your decision and move on. But to get to that point, I think it's experience. It's weighing other people, weighing the data of people's opinions, and recognizing your strategy and where you want to go. And I lean on my teams. I always have a lot to understand like where they're coming from. I'd love it when people challenge me, not because I'm, just because there's a different way of looking at things. But I think you do have to, for decisions, I think you have to be comfortable, make them, and then not worry about them. That said, changing your mind, you should be totally open changing your mind, right? I might change my mind, but which is different than making a decision, but open to facts. But I do, if you leave, think about like if I were to leave things open and not decide right away, you're at the end of the day, you've got so much to go back and do. So I try to make decisions when they're presented.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming on again.
Thanks, Lindsay.
That is a great question. Great question. So I think there are some other folks there in the audience, but we'll give some time to it for them to come on up. And wanted to just try to transition to more a little bit about your current role. So tell us about that and what someone in your capacity does, and a little bit more about your team and your experiences so far being there.
Sure. So I absolutely love what I do. I love the team, the tech, and the company. So when I left, when I was writing my book, I decided I wanted to, like, how do you institute change? How do we move this industry forward? And I really thought it was either going to an institution or going to a tech company. And because I feel like those are the two areas that can more easily move forward. It's very difficult to generate revenue at the in-between companies when you're constantly fundraising, because I have done that as well. I've also been a VC and invested, so I've kind of played different sides. But I went to talk to institutions and realized that's not really what I wanted to do. So I really wanted to do the tech side. And so I had this great opportunity. So as I said before, Kadena is a proof of work layer 1 blockchain. It was founded by two gentlemen that created JP Morgan's first innovation lab. I hate for this to be like an infomercial, but it jazzes me up. So, so I apologize in advance. And they left to kind of create a public chain that was the best of Bitcoin and Ethereum. And they launched it 5 years ago successfully. And then they were tech guys doing tech. So the whole idea of, from hoodies to suits, it was a bunch of hoodies, and they're super great, wonderful, brilliant people, but they just didn't really focus on building a business. And so they brought me in to do that, to focus on kind of let's grow. And so it's super exciting to me to be able to work at a protocol at a layer 1 with a liquid token, and we get to build. And so it's just every day, tech moves fast, not fast enough, but it's super exciting. So that is my quick and dirty. But what we're looking for is, we're looking for more people to build on chain. We're looking for more developers to take part. And so those are our focuses.
I love that. Love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And kind of shifting gears a little bit to kind of more of the fun questions. I wanted to ask this to you because if you had the opportunity to sit down with one of the hoodies and one of the suits for dinner, who would they be, and what would your first question that you would ask them?
Oh my goodness. I feel like they're so important. The suits, I think, there's so many to choose from, but I do think Jamie Dimon would be interesting just because of Jamie Dimon's like right and left hands, right?
Yeah.
But the recognition of what he has created, that could be like if we're dealing with finance and not politicians. I think that would be interesting. From a hoodies perspective, I think my two founders are super fun to talk to all the time. I love to be challenged because I'm not a tech person. I'm a business person, and I love math, but I'm not a programmer. So I don't know. I think Satoshi would be, it's funny to think about the personalities, right? Of somebody that during Occupy Wall Street, creates a peer-to-peer payment transfer technology and coin. Or Vitalik, that would be funny. With Jamie
that
at the same time. I mean, goodness.
Imagine that. Did you hear that there's supposed to be like a documentary on HBO about like who Satoshi Nakamoto is. I
Saw
kind of
that.
wonder what that's all about, but I
I
seen
know.
I, I,
I know.
I seen that dominating my feed today. Every single person and their mom is posting something about that, so thought that was pretty funny. Now
Well,
yeah, go for it.
no, I was going to say we'll call them them, Satoshi.
Yes, them,
Could be a group,
all
no?
of them. You never know,
Yeah.
right? Now, you're also known for bringing together innovators and, traditionalists, right? So, what's kind of maybe a fun or surprising way that you can build rapport with someone from the opposite side?
You mean the hoodies and the suits? How to work together?
Yeah.
Oh, I do love bringing people together. I always say that I'm not creative, but I do love to plan events and host events. Um, so how do we get hoodies and suits to talk together? I think finding common ground. I think first of all, it's a mindset to be open that you need on both sides. Because I feel like I talk to suits that don't have open minds, and I've talked to hoodies that don't have open minds. So I do feel like there's kind of mentality, but part of that is just putting everybody at ease. Um,
I
I
mean,
think that's
what's it been like when you've had those encounters with the people that didn't have an open mind? How do you combat that, or did you even combat that at all?
there's only so far you can go. I feel like I've always been an odd man out. I used to do CMBS and nobody knew what that was until the crisis, and then people would want to question me about it. And now blockchain, like not necessarily cocktail party conversations if you're trying to go to mainstream things. And I used to live in Kiev as well. When I would come back to the U.S. and go to cocktail parties, no one knew what to say to me. Um, so no, I do think it doesn't. If somebody's mind is totally closed, it's not worth it. You're not going to get very far. And obviously, there are people from my personal TradFi world that I've known forever that aren't interested, and they don't believe in it. It's almost like it's political. Even though it's not political, some people have those feelings, like they have political feelings. And then similarly with the hoodies, I actually spent time helping VCs with their portfolio companies, and it was interesting that some of the hoodies weren't interested um, in advice either. So you get it from both sides. This is what we just need to work with the people that we can, and we need to move forward as we can. So we will find interesting and innovative people along the way. And then hopefully through education and through actual implementation of the technology, people will come around. And if not, people will age out anyway, I think.
Yeah, I agree there. So we do have a question. Zach, I do see that you were raising your hand earlier, so we're going to allow you to come on up. What's your question for us today?
So my question is kind of twofold. One, what do you think the most common misperception of the DeFi space is? And two, when you think about technology adoption on a Gartner hype cycle, where do you think your customers are today on that hype cycle? And which ones are you gunning for that may be laggards?
Okay. So, sorry, what was the first one? What was your first question?
Biggest misperception of DeFi.
Biggest misperception. Yeah. So biggest misperception of crypto, I think, is that we are all degens and that we are all out to break laws, sort of thing, right? We're all rule breakers. So because I feel like that's that we're all crooks. So I feel like that is definitely with a lot of people's minds, kind of the perception of Silk Road. Still sees that from a decentralized finance perspective, and we're trying to embezzle money, which I do not believe in. And I'm a huge believer TradFi and DeFi will merge. I think it will start with kind of the private credit markets and all of this lending. We just need a little KYC, AML, to digital identity in there. So that's the first. And then you had asked about what stage are the people we're working with. Is that at Kadena? Zach?
Sorry about that. Yes, at Kadena, based on sort of a Gartner hype cycle of early adopters to laggards, where would you sort of plot the current client base?
So I would think we're still kind of at the early adopters. Well, I think TradFi is generally a laggard anyway. So there are a number of conversations we're having that are probably with. I mean, is TradFi early adopters still? I was thinking, kind of crypto, DeFi. We have a lot in that space. I don't know anyone's at the laggard stage yet. But that said, if you think about like most of the institutions that we didn't want to be the first mover, I think Franklin Templeton and Fidelity were. I think they're also private. They're more like private companies than public companies. It's very difficult for public companies to accept innovation because they are judged quarterly when the CEO has to talk to the shareholders. But I do think with BlackRock coming in and with, JP Morgan, I feel like people are getting much more comfortable. So I almost feel like BlackRock's a little bit of a laggard, but they're obviously not because they're one of the leaders. So it's difficult to say, but I would say we're probably, I wouldn't say anyone I don't say anyone touching digital assets right now is quite the laggard. So I guess we're still we're in the early stages, but I don't think we're in the first chapter.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wanted just to jump in here and kind of maybe tag onto it a little bit, but this is something that is going to come into play. What role do you see institutions like the central banks playing in a future dominated by digital assets? Do you think that they're going to be more of a friend or a foe?
So it's interesting with this, the idea of Bitcoin wasn't Occupy Wall Street, but they came at about the same time in 2008 with the idea of let's cut out all intermediaries. We don't need banks. Banks are evil. But I do think that there is a world where everybody works together in a sense. I think obviously there's going to be digital banking that is, and intermediaries are going to be decreased because they're not going to be needed as much. I think even as regulators like this technology, even though they're still learning it, because you can track and trace so much easier and it leaves a fingerprint where you go and you can control more. So I do think there's benefits for banks. I also think that banks and asset managers are going to have to they're going to have to figure out how to work with the technology.
Yeah.
If I hold all the currency in my wallet, it's not in the bank. If the bank doesn't get to hold it because it's not in my account, and I get to lend it out so I can be the bank. But my mom is not going to want to be the bank. My mom's going to want her money, someone else to hold the money, and they can lend it out. It's fine with her. But that could merge into being almost an investment account where you have cash and you have investments in the same thing, and maybe someone's out lending your money for you if it's actively traded. So I do think there's different levels. So banks, it will affect. We're looking 10 years out. I do think it will affect banks for sure. Think about cross-border payments. Cross-border payments, they make a lot of money on right now. Think about the float. I cashed a check. This is probably 6 months ago now, but it took 5 days to clear. And so for 5 days, the bank got to hold on to that money. I couldn't put it to work, and the velocity of money would speed up, and the bank wouldn't have that float if that were the case, when we use digital money. So I do feel like banks are going to have to figure out business lines with this new technology. But I also want to highlight that when interest rates were high in the 80s, we made money. And when interest rates were low in the 2000s, we made money. So we just figure out different ways. It's very smart people doing this.
Yeah, for sure. So we do have a longtime supporter of the channel here. Starsky, how's it going? Welcome back. What's your question?
All right. Hello. And then I want to make sure I pronounce your name correctly. Annelise? Annelise.
Yes.
Quick question, and this goes to the broader audience. So it seems like in the crypto space, one, I live in the U.S. I am mostly trying to take work in the crypto Web3 space, but most of my conversations are being held overseas, from Switzerland to Singapore, more of those countries versus the U.S. Knowing that technology advances, what makes countries move faster in the space? Is it politics? Is it FOMO? Is it a combination of all? What makes people say, okay, we got to be in this space now and really put the dollars behind the mouth?
I think there's probably a few things. Great to meet you, Starsky. I think that one, it could be economic. It could be that there is hyperinflation and that people are looking up for opportunities to put their money somewhere. I think it could be marketing and hype. It could be that we all want to have this NFT, or my friends all have crypto, and so I want to have crypto too. So I think that, and then I do think regulation as well could come into it, because I think the first two steps aren't necessarily as much with regulation, but I do think there are more regulatory environments for sure. And there's more, regulatory limiting. And so I feel like all three of those steps could, be it economic, be it marketing, or be it regulation, would make a difference.
Awesome. And then one last question: regulations, marketing. Yes, that's awesome. Why it seems like the U.S. Is lagging in this space? Yes, you have Fidelity. Yes, you have crypto. .com, you have the crypto arena, but it looks like most of those efforts in this space is being focused on other countries. Why is the U.S. lagging in this space?
I think because the regulation is gray and you can't play in the gray if you're an institution and nobody wants to go to jail. There's obviously been some kind of high level arrests or Wells notices from the SEC that have gone out. I think that a lot of them are, I think there wasn't negative intent for a lot of what happened for the most part. And I think that's scary. I mean, look at what happened with Coinbase. They got a Wells notice after they had just gotten approval to go public, and so from the SEC, and so that's really gray, and it's hard if it's gray to have a company that's been around for a long time try something new. So I feel like that there's a lot going on in Singapore in the sandboxes where people, even U.S. companies and banks, are testing things out outside of the United States. So they're ready to go with innovation when the U.S. opens up or has more finality on how they view crypto and blockchain.
All right, I don't want to take this meeting over, but this is going to be my final question. Welcome to the most well-known political season in the U.S. What should we here focus on when it comes to what legislations, what's being put out there in this space, so we can help move the needle?
I think from an institutional perspective, I think SASB 121 is one of the bigger concerns, which was you had all these institutional banks trying to do custody of crypto assets, and the accounting requirements were problematic. That said, they have just made an exception for BNY Mellon. And so maybe that will change. So I think talking with legislatures and regulators and all of the education that we can put out there and time we can spend and share with them, I think is super important. I hope that answers it.
That's great. So time is almost up here. I did have a couple of other questions for you on the fun side, and then we'll do a little bit of a segment for our bullish and bearish. But, what's something that most people probably don't know about you, but it plays a huge part in why you've been able to succeed in such complex, fast-moving industries?
I don't know. I guess I have a lot of grit. And then I don't like it when people tell me no. I grew up in a military base in the middle of the Pacific called Kwajalein. It was wonderful to grow up there. It was generally rocket scientists for the most part in one way, shape, or form. And they, PhDs. My father was a PhD. But no women worked. And so I grew up in this world where the women were teachers or assistants. And so for me, it was always, why, I want to have, why are they different? Like, why are boys different than girls? Like, why can't I? And so I feel like that has always driven me to an extent when, my brother was given opportunities that I wasn't given. And so that is probably true, which was what keeps me going. And it always, it helps having always been different. I always felt different because, I have a lot of really good friends that are, men much older than me that are very academic, and I love sitting down and having conversations with them. And so just being different, like being a different type of person, I feel like that has allowed me to not try to fit in and just be me.
And maybe more on the personal side, has your interest and obviously transition to working in this space, has that impacted any relationships that you had or made people just kind of look at you as if you're this crazy person?
I don't know about that. Obviously, not everybody, my whole world of TradFi doesn't really carry over, but I don't know. I feel like I've always been a little bit of a crazy person because I said I, did commercial mortgage-backed securities. No one knew what those were, and before that I lived in Kiev, and no one knew how to say about that. And so, I've always been a little bit different. So I don't know that. I mean, I'm sure people have opinions they don't share with me if they are huge non-believers in kind of crypto or blockchain. But I also think it's important to not have every relationship be a work relationship or talk about work. So
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes you gotta keep them separated, all right? So the last question is, if your career had a soundtrack, what would be the main theme song and why?
I don't know the answer to this. I'm not very good at these things. Um, yeah, I couldn't even answer that. But I appreciate it, and that is going to be dinner table conversation tonight for sure.
Yes, yes, I love that.
I love it.
So
Thanks, Robert.
let's go to our last segment here, bearish or bullish. So, um, artificial intelligence.
I am bullish.
Why?
The world is moving faster. We are innovating faster. Artificial intelligence, when we make that happen even more so. If you think about how long it takes to code something, this is just in code and further innovation. You can use artificial intelligence and it takes you, like what would take you 4 hours, it will take you 10 minutes, and you can review and then move forward. So it really shrinks that time. So I think innovation will happen faster. I think we'll use AI in our lives more than we realize we already use AI in our lives, and it will make it more efficient. So I just had a conversation yesterday with an academic who was talking to me about like man versus machine and how AI is going to totally take over. But I don't think that's the case. I think that, there's ways we use it as a tool, and it makes us much more efficient.
I like that. Next question. Are you bearish or bullish on interoperability between different blockchains?
I'm totally bullish. I think that there is a world out there. There's a lot of different things to be created and built, and even business out there with all the different layer ones. And I think that the interoperability is super important because we're building networks together. I think there's obviously benefits for, private chains have their benefits, but I believe the world will go more public.
Yeah.
And interoperability too, I like.
I think so for sure. And I know that we were alluding to this and kind of dancing around the subject, but regulatory clarity, or just regulation overall, bearish or bullish?
Regulatory clarity. I have to say, I told you I'm an optimist. So that is my answer. And I have to say bullish on regulatory clarity because I'm an optimist. I think it is going to be a rocky road and it's not going to be straightforward. It will be more of a zigzag path, but I would like to say yes. We are the US. We will win in the end. It's just not easy to get there.
Yeah, for sure. And then lastly, let's it's obviously a topic that everyone's talking about, but tokenization, bearish or bullish?
I'm bullish. Absolutely. There's so many use cases, and I think it's super exciting to see where we'll go. It's just a matter of time getting there. It's not going to happen tomorrow.
Indeed, for sure. So we are almost up on time here, folks. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate everyone for joining us in this insightful chat that we've had. It's Friday evening or afternoon here in the States, and there's a million other things that you all could be doing, but you took time out of your day to join us, and we are very grateful for that. And I am extremely grateful for you to join us today, Annelise, and provide your continuous insights as you always do. In terms of if there's anyone that wants to get in touch with you or collaborate or maybe create some kind of partnership or just wants to keep up with all that you're doing because you are a mover and shaker, how would they do that?
First of all, flattery will get you everywhere, so thank you. I am on LinkedIn is what I'm on the most. I don't really follow Twitter X as I should, but LinkedIn, I'm active on that. So easiest way to get in touch with me is there.
Cool. And what about the roadmap for Kadena and anything else that you're doing? Are you going to be thinking about writing another book soon? Do you got anything else kind of in the pipeline that we don't know about?
No, it's just building Kadena. I'm super excited about all that we are doing. We're building out the teams. We've got some real A stars that have joined us and we're there already. And so it's going to be a fun ride. It's going to be a great year.
Nice. And what's your next stop on the kind of tour that you're doing? I know you're going to be all over the place. Where you headed next?
I am in New York next week, and then I'm doing DC, New York 1 week. I'm doing Lisbon and London. You know, it's lovely to have so many people to speak to.
It is indeed. Well, we'll wrap it up. And in terms of the surprise for everyone that stayed here till the end, what I will do is I'm going to pick someone in random, and what we will do is I will contact you, and we're going to be sending you a free signed, hand signed, individualized copy of Annelise's book to you, and that's just something that she's been so gracious to do. It's an amazing read, folks. So I don't have to continue to amp it up. It's a lot of people are already talking about it, so you'll figure this out yourself as well too. So we're gonna pick someone random in the audience and get that sent out. And I really appreciate everyone for joining today. Thank you so much. Please stay tuned for other future episodes. We're going to be getting some short clips of this conversation today uploaded to LinkedIn, and then we're going to get this full conversation uploaded to YouTube. If you haven't or you're not doing it so far, follow us at Crypto Recruiters. That's our handle for our YouTube channel. We got tons of great stuff there, great educational content, and really looking forward to staying in touch, Annelise. And everyone else, stay safe. Have a great weekend. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.